Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. You know, one question I ask every guest on Everyday Martial Artist is about their favorite martial arts book. And there's never been one quite like Martial Theory by Steve Perlman, described as the art of war for the martial arts. Martial Theory helps any martial artist or instructor take their understanding and teaching to the next level. And at martialtheoryU.com, you'll find a global community with instructor groups, Q&A with Steve, live events, and demonstrations to help you apply martial theory directly to your training. It's not just a book, it's a movement. Find Martial Theory on Amazon, and when you join martialtheoryU.com, use discount code EverydayMA for 20% off. That's under $20 a month for life. That's martialtheoryU.com, code EverydayMA. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts. My guest today is a highly experienced martial artist and instructor whose journey spans some of the most respected lineages in modern combat arts. He is a certified instructor with the International Krav Maga Federation, the organization founded by Imi Lichtenfeld, and one of the oldest and most established Krav Maga bodies in the world. Under the direct guidance of Master Avi Moyal, a top student of Imi and one of the highest-ranking Krav Maga practitioners globally, he developed a deep understanding of practical, real-world self-defense. His training extends into Jeet Kune Do and the Filipino Martial Arts under Guro Dan Inosanto, one of only 3 individuals personally appointed by Bruce Lee to carry on his art. As an apprentice instructor under Guro Inosanto, he brings a principle-based approach rooted in adaptability, timing, and efficiency. With additional experience in boxing, Muay Thai, and Wing Chun, studying under respected teachers including Sifu Augustine Fong, he's built a well-rounded and highly functional skill set. A certified USA boxing coach, he has trained with former champions and top-level coaches, further refining his understanding of striking. His teaching career has taken him across the United States and internationally, including time spent living and teaching in India, where he founded the Himalayan Academy of Martial Arts, and Dharmasala. Known for his clear, practical, and highly effective instruction, he emphasizes strong fundamentals, precision, and the ability to adapt under pressure. Please welcome my guest today, Mr. Richard Syrop. How you doing today, Richard?
Doing great, Brian. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it. And I know anytime I have a guest from another country and they have the weird time changes, I appreciate the adaptability. I think you said we're about 10 and a half hours difference. So
that sounds right.
Yeah. I can definitely be a challenge, and I'm glad we're making this happen. Also, I know you said you've listened to the show and you're a fan of the show, so you know what we do. But what we do with all my guests is we go back to the beginning. I want to know where that first interest in martial arts came from, that first spark that kicked off your martial arts journey.
So for me, the first spark was definitely boxing. That was the first art I studied and my first love, you can say. My father and my brother were students of Ed Parker Kempo, and it was kind of a way we all bonded by watching the boxing fights.
Okay.
And I, for one reason or another, I never really gravitated towards Kempo.
Really?
And it wasn't until I found myself actually in a pretty tough position in my life when I was 16 and my parents had separated. My dad had some legal troubles. My mom had kind of fallen in a bad path due to drug addiction. I was more or less out on my own when I was 16, living with my aunt and uncle. And I turned towards boxing at that time. Could have really headed down a bad direction in my life. And in a sense, boxing kind of saved me. It gave me a sense of self, a sense of purpose, gave me great mentors, taught me humility, discipline, self-respect. And that was the start of my martial art journey.
Okay. And how did you choose that first boxing instructor? And how many did you go to before you picked the one that fit?
Great question. So when I started, I went to the closest gym, basically, in my area, which was a gym at that time called Billy McCoy's Boxing Gym. And it was in Queens, New York.
Okay.
And went in, and the way the boxing scene at that time is, you just kind of fell in, you did your own training, you picked guys to model your training after. And then if trainers saw your dedication and saw your worth, they would come over and they would start working with you a bit. So my first trainer was a guy named Jimmy. Definitely wasn't the best trainer of the lot.
Okay.
And he showed some interest in me, and he kind of came from that really old school boxing mentality where, there's not much regard for safety. And, they just kind of throw you in with sometimes guys who weigh 20 pounds more and let you bang it out. And that was the first guy I worked with.
Okay.
And after a period of time with Jimmy, another trainer, Charlie, started kind of giving me some pointers when Jimmy wasn't around. And I could see Charlie was more seasoned, definitely a more veteran trainer. And he was the one who I spent a good deal of time with and did some amateur matches under. And then, interestingly enough, kind of right when I was getting ready to pivot out of boxing, there was a period where I had strong ambitions and I thought I really wanted to go pro.
Okay.
But I started noticing things like the memory impact, and I developed a slight stuttering habit. Luckily, that went away. Wow. And I just kind of decided I was going to transition, and it was in my last month of my membership at Billy McCoy's Boxing Gym that Kevin Kelly, who was the former featherweight champion in the world, and his head trainer, Phil Borgia, they were just getting ready to start their camp for the Prince Nassim Hamed fight. Oh, wow. I don't know if you remember Prince Nassim Hamed. He was like a legend.
Big time. Yep.
So at that point, I was pretty much at my peak, I would say, with boxing. And I was particularly really good on the double M bag. And I remember I was doing my rounds on the double M bag, and Phil Borgia came over, and I saw him kind of watching me. And then he called his assistant instructor over, and they were having a talk. And when I finished my round, Phil introduced himself to me, and he asked me how long I've been training and what's my experience with boxing. And then he said, we had a cancellation with one of Kevin's sparring partners. And he said, how would you like to spar with Kevin today? And, my jaw about dropped. And I said, it would be a huge honor. And of course, I would love that opportunity. And got in the ring, and I did a few rounds with Kevin. And I had a very awkward style at that time. I was very quick with my hands, but my style would kind of fall into a bit of an awkward style, I guess you could say, very unconventional. Okay. And I was pretty proud of how I did. I was able to put a little bit of leather on Kevin here and there. And then at the end, when the session was over, came out of the ring and I was just kind of warming down. And I saw Phil and Kevin and his small team having a little chat. And then Phil walked over to me and he asked, what were my timings with the gym and how often I was coming. And he invited me to kind of be part of Kevin's team getting ready for the fight. Wow. And it was an amazing experience, Brian. One of the highlights for me, not just in my martial art journey, but in my life. Yeah. And for 3 months, 3 days a week, I was there, often sparring with Kevin. I got a chance to do rounds with some other up-and-coming fighters. And one actually was Zab Judah at the time. He was up-and-coming, and I got a chance to spar with Zab Judah and a junior Olympic champion, which was pretty cool. And more than anything, in addition to sparring with Kevin, Phil would always come over and give me just some great pointers. And it was such a phenomenal experience in those 3 months. And at the end of it, I remember, when the camp wound down and I went to Phil and I said, what could I ever do to pay you guys back? And he said, Richard, the night of the fight, just go to a church, any church, and just light a candle for Kevin's safety. Wow. And he said that would be payback. And it was a wonderful experience, Brian, and a great introduction, you could say, in a sense, into the world of martial arts.
Yeah. So, I mean, you had be right before that happened. Like you said, you had talked about walking away from it because of, health concerns and stuff. Was that ever a concern during those 3 months? Were you worried at all?
Not at all with Kevin, because when you're sparring with, and even the people around Kevin, I think when you're sparring with that caliber of fighters, they understand, that the importance of safety. So no, it wasn't a concern at all in those 3 months where he was getting ready for the Hamed fight.
That is cool. That's really, that's one thing I wish I would have done a little more of was boxing. Cause I did it when I was little. I can't remember, like 11, 12, 13, but there's a somewhat famous boxer from my hometown who boxed in the Olympics and was one of Muhammad Ali's sparring partners. And he did like an intro boxing class. And I took that with Dwayne Bobbick and actually ended up graduating high school with his younger sister. And then when I was,
cool.
And then about 15 years ago, I got to train with a gentleman named Jim Erickson, who's a former guest of the show, who was one of Virgil Hill's original trainers. So I've been, been lucky to train with a couple really good guys. I just never took it any further. So what an experience. That's cool. That's really cool that you got to do that. So then you obviously wanted to keep going in martial arts. Now, was it right when you left boxing, did you decide right then, I'm going to find something else? And how did that kind of happen? What did you start looking for?
Yeah. So at that point, both my brother and I had a strong interest in Jeet Kune Do. So my brother was always a huge fan of Bruce, as was my father. And, like the Tao of Jeet Kune Do was always on the coffee table in our house. And we were in New York at this time, and we started doing some research, and we saw two schools. One was like an official Jeet Kune Do school. Mm-hmm. And I think it had some ties. At that time, Linda Lee was kind of doing her own independent thing.
Okay.
And it had ties to that organization. And then there was another guy, Mike Ryan, he was a New York State kickboxing champion. He was teaching Muay Thai. He was teaching Kempo. And then he also kind of positioned himself unofficially as a Jeet Kune Do teacher.
Okay.
So we went and checked out both schools. And the official Jeet Kune Do school, we weren't very impressed with the instructor. And then right when we walked in Mike Ryan's school, I think both my brother and I just really connected and bonded with Mike. And he really took a strong liking to us. Mm-hmm. So we started studying there. And I had mentioned to Mike, I had just kind of come out of the experience of working with Kevin. And he was quite impressed with the way I moved as far as the boxing goes. Mm-hmm. So he put my brother and I like right into the advanced and right into the sparring class. I think we were both there about 6 months.
Okay.
And that was doing, it was kind of had a similar feel to Guro Dan's academy where, he was just teaching a variety of arts. You went to different classes and you kind of formulated an art of your own, kind of true to the Jeet Kune Do. Mm-hmm. So we studied with Mike Ryan during that period. And then both my brother and I moved to Tucson, Arizona.
Okay.
And at that point, I still had, a heavy interest in Jeet Kune Do and particularly Bruce and his, the different arts he studied. And when we went to Tucson and we were researching different teachers, I read about Sifu Augustine Fong, mm-hmm. who at that time, was highly regarded in the art of Wing Chun and definitely considered one of the best Wing Chun Sifus in the United States. And I went to Sifu Augustine Fong's class, and he was another teacher I just felt like I instantly gelled with. And that was a big transition because I was used to more boxing, kickboxing, a little bit of Muay Thai. So it was very interesting transitioning to Wing Chun, which, is a much more traditional kind of softer art in some senses.
Yeah. It's kind of cool because like your first ever school you went to in New York was completely luck. It was the closest one you went to, and you ended up leading you to that amazing experience and stuff. But the other two, you actually, because of that, I suppose, knowledge and experience you gained there, you actually researched what you're going to do and look deeper for your next few instructors, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, it's always the closest one. It's either the closest one or they're moving specifically to train somewhere. But I'm curious. Earlier you mentioned your dad and your brother both training in the Parker system. Did Kempo ever interest you at all? Is that something you ever looked into?
So it never really did, actually. Okay. But it's interesting because when I've talked to my dad and showed him some Krav Maga stuff, And same with my brother. It actually, both of them tell me it bears a lot of similarities to Ed Parker Kempo.
Okay.
Which is kind of interesting.
And also, Inosanto, he had a background in Parker Kempo also.
Yep.
So
yeah, he was Ed Parker Kempo black belt. Yep. And I should actually add, Brian, if I actually look at who was my first real teacher in martial arts, it was my father. He gave me my first early lessons in martial arts, where he showed me, different block systems and very basic different self-defense techniques.
Nice.
So, I guess in a sense, the first bit of martial arts I got a taste of was Ed Parker Kempo through my father.
Very cool. That's good. And then you mentioned, in moving to Tucson and doing the research and finding Sifu Augustine, what are some of the first memories of, walking into that school for the first time and that experience?
So I can't say I have, a memory so much of when I first walked in, but I will say during that period, some of the deepest memories I have of Augustine Fang were, one, not just the martial art, not just the, amazing martial artist he was, but also the type of person he was and how peaceful he was, how genuinely happy he was, the way he really cared and mentored his students. And, kind of his, I say carefree, like kind of a carefree attitude in life. But when I say that, I mean almost carefree, like a Zen Buddhist monk in a sense.
Okay.
Where he just had this very go with the flow mentality. And for me, it was one of the first times in my life I was exposed to someone that just really seemed to be tremendously at peace, tremendously comfortable in their own skin, and tremendously happy. And those are, and Augustine Fang, even to this day, because I went back and spent some time with him a couple years ago and did like a 6-week intensive with him. Even to this day, he embodies that, where just he's so much at peace within himself and in life. So that's some of my early memories of the man, Augustine Fang. But as far as Sifu Fang's martial arts, I think the memory that stands out is every year Sifu Augustine Fang hosts a Wing Chun seminar, where he has all of his senior students who are now instructors all over the United States and even, with the reach in Europe, come back to the school, and he does this seminar. And sometimes instructors from other lineages in Wing Chun also come. Most the Ip Man lineage, but not necessarily connected with him. And I remember I attended the seminar my first year at the school, and Sifu Fang, a huge part of the way he teaches Wing Chun is Chi Sao. He would often dedicate, I would say, 40 to 50% of the class just the Chi Sao. And his students are really known for being great rollers when it comes to sticky hands. And I remember in the seminar, Augustine Fang was walking around, and there was maybe from what I remember, about 50 to 60 people. And there was one individual, and I think he was from somewhere I'm not sure if it was Japan or China, but, he definitely was from one of the Asian countries. And he was working with a lot of Sifu Fang's really high-level instructors at the academy and getting the best of them. And this guy was kind of clearly the alpha on the floor. You would watch him, and other people were kind of looking at him, and it was very clear he was the guy who was the top dog, you can say, at the seminar. And after a period, he walked over to Sifu Fang and said, very humbly and respectfully, Sifu, can I have the honor of doing Chi Sao with you? And Sifu politely declined. And then he kind of pushed, and he mentioned, you can see him kind of talking to Sifu, and it appeared like he was mentioning the expense and the how far he traveled. So Sifu accepted. And as soon as Sifu Fang accepted, like the whole floor just cleared, and everyone was just like, oh, what's going to happen here? And I remember watching Brian, and this is not an exaggeration. I mean, this guy could not land a single shot on Sifu. And every single shot Sifu Fang threw was like vital, right to the throat, and was just landing with ease. And then after a couple of minutes, this guy started to shake because, he had a lot of his students there, and you could see he was feeling a bit embarrassed. And, Sifu Fang just kind of gracefully took him down to the ground in like a soft arm bar. And he had the humility when he got up, to bow and recognize that there's, Sifu Fang is just at a whole nother level than anyone else there. Wow. But it was just so impressive seeing that, because I've seen that with Sifu Fang, and I still see it when I went back a couple years ago, that no one can lay a hand on him. He almost has a sixth sense where he can just anticipate everything. But this guy, dominating Sifu Fang's instructors, it resonated to a different level.
That's cool. Wow. And how long did you stay training with him?
I think it was 3 years that I was at the academy.
Yeah. Okay. And then did you move because of martial arts? Did you move because of a regular job? And what did you seek out next?
So after studying with Augustine Fang, Brian, my life actually took a very unique twist. So I came to India, and I came to India with a strong interest in yoga and Indian spirituality. And I was in India for 6 months, backpacking, traveling around.
Wow.
And really fell in love with the country, the culture. And my journey actually took a very different turn after that, where I ended up doing a lot of extensive traveling and actually ended up moving and relocating to India. I mean, that was many years later, but I after the time with Augustine, I actually stepped out of martial arts for a bit. I mean, I always did self-practice, and particularly boxing has always been an anchor in my life. But there was a number of years I wasn't a part of an academy and didn't have an instructor. And I was, I think, living a bit more of just a free lifestyle in that period.
Nice. And how long did that last about?
So it lasted, I think, about 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
And then I got married.
Okay.
Ended up relocating to Seattle, Washington.
Okay.
And at that point, I was pretty deep into the corporate world. I was working with Whole Foods and in a leadership position. And I would have loved, in hindsight, I look back and I'm like, oh man, I could have trained with some great JKD practitioners.
Yeah.
Which I unfortunately didn't take advantage of. Wow. But at that point, I really was just keeping up with boxing.
Okay.
So boxing, and I was giving some private instruction on the side, and boxing kind of re-emerged as my art of practice and more just a form of almost self-therapy and a form of staying fit.
Okay.
And then it was some years later that I started studying Krav Maga and diving into that. Then if I fast forward a bit, I found myself living in India. I was living in Bombay, and I had just come out of a marriage. And I was in a very big transitional period in my life. And COVID had just hit. My marriage for 15 years ended. I just left the corporate job I was working with in Bombay, India. And I found myself in Dharamsala. And I came up to Dharamsala because the U.S. was just an absolute disaster in the beginning of COVID.
Yep.
And I was stuck in this little apartment I was staying in Bombay. And I had no reason to be in Bombay anymore. And I just remembered visiting Dharamsala and thinking, well, even in the pandemic, it's up in the mountains. This would just be such a great place to be. So I came up here thinking I would be here for maybe a month or two till COVID blew over. And as we know now, that went on for quite some time.
Yep.
So I ended up staying in Dharamsala 9 months. And when I was here, there was just this lovely community of expats who were living here at the time, and Indians, who had also wanted to get out of the cities, who were here. And I ended up starting teaching boxing. Friends of mine had heard I had deep experience in boxing, and everyone just had a lot of time in their hands, to be honest. So I started giving some private lessons, and then I started working with some individuals who wanted more than boxing. So I fell back on some of the knowledge that I had acquired from Wing Chun and a little bit of the Krav Maga. I wasn't certified to teach at that time, but I pulled from the depths of knowledge I had and started teaching people a little bit of self-defense.
Yeah.
And it was such a rewarding experience. And I worked with a couple people that they just told me it really transformed their lives. And it was at that point where I'm like, man, I wonder if, I could actually teach full time and kind of, transition my career from working in natural foods to martial arts. And I had always had a dream and a vision to train with Dan Inosanto.
Yeah.
And I was at that point in my life where I was like, there's nothing holding me back from doing really anything. And I had some good savings from my years in the corporate space. So I just decided to go to LA and go like full on into it. And I ended up staying there about 2.5 years. And I was at that academy 5 days a week studying with Guro Dan. And I was also studying with Krav Maga Worldwide, which happens to have its headquarters in LA.
Okay.
So that was a major turning point for me in my life and my martial art journey.
Wow. So 2 questions. First of all, back up a little bit. When you were in Seattle, I know you said you didn't get involved with any of the JKD there, but did you at least take time and go visit Bruce Lee's gravesite when you were there?
Of course. Okay. I did do that. Yeah.
That's still on my list. I haven't done that yet. I'm hoping in the next 2 years I can get out there and do that. But I had to ask that.
Since you asked about that, kind of a cool experience I had was, I forget exactly what milestone it was. I'm not sure if it might have been like the 25th death anniversary of Bruce, but there was some special event taking place where they had a lot of the first generation instructors come.
Wow.
And I went to that event and I actually met there Jesse Glover, who was one of Bruce's very first students.
Yeah.
And I did go train at Jesse Glover's school in Chinatown in Seattle, which was badass. That was such a cool experience.
That's cool.
But at the time, I mean, it was a very hardcore group training there, and I think I went for about maybe 2 weeks, and I just felt, you know what, I wasn't in a position in my life where I could have that level of dedication. I didn't want to be one of those guys who showed up and was like huffing and puffing, and but it was a really cool experience training with Jesse Glover and seeing, he had like this little martial arts school, it was in like the basement of a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown. It couldn't have been cooler. So that was kind of a cool experience.
I got to ask, at that event that you were at, do you remember, was James DeMille one of the ones that was there?
I don't remember if he was there.
Okay.
Taki Kamari was there. Taki Kamari's son was there. Jesse Glover was there. And yeah, those are the figures that stood out to me.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, because James was one of my first interviews back 5 years ago. So
okay,
before
cool.
I think I was his last interview before he passed away, unfortunately. But he told me some of the Seattle stories and stuff, and that was kind of cool to listen to.
Yeah, and Sharon Lee was also there. I do remember that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So then, when you went to LA, you said you were training at Dan's 5 days a week, plus you were training at Krav Maga Worldwide. So between the two of them, about how many hours a day were you training?
I think on the average day, it was about 5.
Not bad. Okay.
Yeah, not too bad. And yeah, I mean, the saving grace with that is, Guro Dan, he teaches some softer arts as well, right? So FMA, the Filipino Martial Arts, with the sticks, that's pretty easy on the body. So that helped because, to get the most face time with Guro Dan, it actually helps to really sink yourself into FMA.
Okay.
He teaches almost all those classes these days and has, I think, since COVID. And so, you can get like about, let's say, 15 hours with him a week if you're doing all the FMA classes. So I pretty much was doing the JKD classes, the FMA classes, the Muay Thai classes, that about half of the Muay Thai classes at the academy. And then I was going to Krav Maga Worldwide and doing 3 to 4 classes a week there. So yeah, it was intense, but it was just such a cool period because I literally, I didn't know anyone in Los Angeles. I had no social or work obligations, and I was just able to go 100% in. And I hadn't really been able to do that since my teenage years in New York with boxing.
That's
so
awesome.
it was pretty cool. Yeah.
Do you remember, did you train much with Ron Balicki?
So I never met Ron Balicki. He wasn't there at that time, but I love his videos. I mean, I've watched a ton of his videos. His JKD series particularly is one of my favorites.
Yeah. He's a super cool guy. So, I mean, he was so fun to interview and chat with, and had so many guests to bring up his name. That's why I had to ask that. Now, when you went to LA, were you going for the sole purpose to get that knowledge, get that experience, knowing that you were going to go back to India and teach more? Was that the main reason you went?
Yes.
Okay.
That was the main reason. And I never expected, actually, though, to be certified by Guro Dan, because when I went, and even before I went, my understanding was that's about a 4-year journey at minimum. And even then, Guro Dan's very selective about his instructors. So my intention was not necessarily to be certified. It was with Krav Maga. It was, I was working actively towards, I want to become a certified Krav Maga instructor. But with Guro Dan, it was really just more about the knowledge. And I did end up training with Paul Vunek as well. And Vunek certified me in that initial stretch. Okay. And I thought, this is kind of good enough because this is one generation away from Dan, and Vunek's a pretty respectable figure in the JKD world. And it wasn't actually until I went back after I completed that, it's about 2.5 year period in Los Angeles. I went back a year later to do another 6 weeks. Okay. And I had told Dan Inosanto about what I was planning on doing in India. And he knew I was certified under Vunek. So, he had no issues with me teaching Jeet Kune Do. And I told him about the space. And I also had another instructor I was quite close with, Sifu Atticus. And when I was telling Dan about India, he really perked up and he thought it was super cool that I was going to teach here. And when I was telling Sifu Atticus about it as well, he said, you should be representing us. He said, you shouldn't. He said, you've trained here. Guro Dan's been one of your biggest mentors in your journey. And he said, let me also have a word with Guro Dan and see. And he said, I can't make any promises, but he said, let me have a talk with him. And I never really asked Sifu Atticus about that again. It didn't really feel appropriate. So I just kind of grinded for, those 6 weeks like I always did and just tried to get the most out of the experience. And then in my last 3 days that I was there, Guro Dan lectures a lot when he talks. He teaches and then he shares stories. And in class, he just started talking to the group a lot about, Richard's going back to India. And he started talking to me a lot about teaching in front of the other students. And, I started wondering, this is interesting because he's speaking a lot about, and he was talking to me also about teaching the Filipino martial arts, which was something I never discussed or even really had ambitions to do. And then I think it was like maybe the second to last day I was there, he walked over and he said, can you make me a promise? And Dan has never asked anything like that with me before. So I said, of course, Guru, what would you like me to do? And he said, in India, in addition to teaching Krav Maga, boxing, and Jeet Kune Do, can you teach the Filipino martial arts and start a small group? And I said, sure. I said, of course, Guro Dan, I can definitely do that. And then on my very last day before I was leaving, he came over to me and he said, before you leave the academy, come talk to me. And I said, sure. And then, the last class ended and he said, Richard, wait here. And he went to his office and he came back with an envelope. And he said, I want you to represent me in India. And that to me was like the single greatest honor I've ever received, Wow.
That is cool.
Yeah.
You said when you were there, you had told him about the space and stuff. I'm curious what went into that. How did you find your space to teach, and talk a little bit about the school and what it looks like, what people can see if they go there?
Cool, Brian. Yeah. So at that time, I hadn't picked out the exact locality. Okay. I just had definitely picked out Dharamsala. So for me, why I was excited to teach in Dharamsala is it's a very unique community here. It's the biggest Tibetan community outside of Tibet in the world. And it's home to His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. So you have just this huge kind of thriving Tibetan community here that has actually made this, their home since Tibet is now overtaken by China. And I always was fascinated by the Tibetan community and always felt a closeness to it. So that's one element. But in addition to that, Dharamsala is kind of become a bit of an alternative lifestyle place where you have people from Europe, the States, Canada, Israel, Australia, really all over the world who have come and formulated a community here. And in addition, you have Indians from all over India. So it doesn't feel, just kind of like this foreign community. It's very mixed. You go to a cafe or a social gathering, and it's just this beautiful mix of people. And that was one of the things I loved about Dharamsala. It was just this super cool community of people who, were kind of looking for, I think most of us looking for an alternative lifestyle, to step out of mainstream society. And I've just formed this beautiful community of individuals, and that's anchored with the Tibetan community. And when I was here, there was nothing with martial arts going on at all. And I just thought, wow. There were people doing Qi, Gong, and Tai Chi that trickled in, but nothing beyond that. And I just thought, it would be so cool to kind of have a martial art space here. And I think I mentioned to you, I started doing the privates, and that kind of inspired me to come to LA. And then I just had this vision of creating the space. And when I came back, I found a nice little space. It's not big. I could only fit about 15 students at a time, but that's fine right now. And I could always expand maybe next year or the year after if I need to. But it's this great space, Brian, where, you walk out the front door and you get beautiful views of the mountains, and you're surrounded by trees and the forest, and it's quiet. And, it's just this really cool, peaceful spot. And the first year that I taught, which was last year in the space, it was quite a bit more foreigners. It was a lot of Europeans and other international students who were coming here visiting. So you'd have people coming for as short as 10 days, and I would say as long as several months, and then some of the permanent residents. And then I was getting some Indians, but it was mainly the Indians who were also visiting or had come from the big cities to live here because they liked the community. However, towards the end of last year, I started to draw more the locals and some of the Tibetans. And it was pretty cool because I closed for the winter. I think you and I were chatting before the podcast. It's just very, very cold, and it kind of becomes a ghost town in the winter. But right when I opened this year, actually my core group was Tibetan students. Wow. I had four Tibetan students and then a handful of Indian students coming from Dharamsala city, which is actually like a 40-minute commute. And the foreigners actually now is taking second seat to the locals. So I was really happy with that change at the start of this year. But it's been really cool because it's just a great mix, Brian. It's like Tibetans, Indians, foreigners, and you have all different levels. I have some guys who are training here who have 20 years martial art experience, and then other guys who are beginners, and, some guys who just came from Thailand and did some intense training there. So it's a really cool mix that we got going on here.
So then how long do you have to close for? Like how long does winter last there?
So I closed for 2 months, January and February.
That's not bad. And
it also, gave me some time to do some of my own training in that period and, be a student again for a bit. So I was great. I'm actually grateful for the cycle, to be honest.
And I know you mentioned a lot of the training with the FMA and stuff. So I'm curious, what's your favorite weapon to train with?
I like the sticks, and I think I got that from Guro Dan, where in particularly, I think the last decade, he doesn't teach the knife so much anymore, and he focuses much more on the sticks and the staff. So for me, double sticks, I would say, is my favorite weapon to work with.
Okay, and is there a weapon that you haven't had the chance to work with that you would like to?
That's a good question. So I would say the Kriambit, if I'm pronouncing it right, which I think is a Filipino weapon, which is a bladed weapon, but it's kind of hooked. I always thought that was kind of cool.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're the first one to mention that. So yeah, that's cool. So think back to, I know you said you even when you were doing boxing, you started just doing some private lessons for people, years and years ago, to now where you're running your own school. Over that time period, what do you think has changed the most about your teaching style over all those years?
That's a good question. Probably, I think the biggest change that has happened has been the influence of Guro Dan. And that's that he kind of throws you in the deep end a bit, where, you go to Guro Dan's FMA class, for example, and, you have 10 black belts in the average class. And then you also have everything in between. You have 2 guys who just walked in the front door days ago, and then all the levels in between that, and somehow it works having everyone together. And I remember at the beginning training an FMA, and I just felt so overwhelmed, to be honest, because there's so many drills, and I remember just going home feeling like I'm not learning anything really, because I'm not, I was very used to just starting with the fundamentals. that you learn the very basics and you just keep building and building. And that's not how Guro Dan teaches. He just really throws you in the deep end, and he has some basic drills, but then by the end of the class, you're doing very high level stuff, even your first week in the academy. And when I started teaching here, I realized quickly I had very different levels in the class, where, as I was saying, I would have some guys who had 20 years martial art experience and came because they were super excited to see I was a part of Guro Dan's lineage, or, the experience I have with IKMF Krav Maga, and some guys who came for the boxing. And then I also had guys who would come in who've never done anything, don't even know how to throw a punch and don't know a stance. And I realized that, I would turn everyone away, the experienced guys, if every class was, okay, this is a fight stance, this is how you advance, this is how you retreat. But I still had to do that. So I ended up, really just having a teaching in a way where, yes, we would do some basics, and I would have to sell that to the advanced guys that it's always good to brush up on basics. But then to the beginners, I would also have them doing really advanced things, and really believing myself in the mentality that if you do kind of put people in the deep end right from the get-go and give them still good fundamentals, but then also show them some high-level advanced stuff, even when they're beginners, that somehow as they progress throughout weeks and months, it ends up just rounding out. And they end up finding themselves in actually a really good position with their martial arts 4 or 5 months down the line if they stick with it. So I think that for me was a change, where I always before felt like, no, I have to, start just with the bare fundamentals, and I can't show a beginner an advanced technique. That approach to teaching has changed as a result of the time with Guro Dan.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, looking at your website, speaking of teaching and stuff, you offer group classes, private classes, and also you have children and teens classes. So percentage-wise, what, how much is group classes, how much is private, how much is kids?
Yeah, so it varies actually throughout the year a bit. Okay. So we have a kind of a peak season, which is April, May, and June, where we have a lot of travelers here, and there's a lot of families.
Okay.
So in that period, kids is a big percentage for me.
Okay.
My kids class, like most martial arts schools, I think is the fullest actually.
Yeah.
In the peak season. And I would say then it's probably about 60% kids.
Wow.
40% adults.
Okay.
But the rest of the year, it shifts to more like 70-80% adults, 20% kids.
Okay.
And privates, my private students, I would say typically make up about, let me think for a second here, maybe about 15%. Okay. I do roughly about somewhere between 5 to 8 privates every week. So I have a good stream of privates. But the group classes definitely outweigh it. And again, like most martial arts schools, today, I think, there's more of an interest in the competition geared arts. Mm-hmm. So boxing, kickboxing are the biggest classes. But for me, my passion is definitely more the self-defense arts. So I almost have to, I wouldn't say sell, because I don't like that word, but I really have to kind of promote the Krav Maga, Jeet Kune Do classes to the students coming for boxing and kickboxing, of just the value it has, not just for self-defense, but also, being a well-rounded martial artist, you can say. So, yeah.
Okay. And I also noticed you have a couple assistant instructors. Now, are those ones, did you seek them out, or did they just happen to find you?
Yeah. So one of them, Navia, was one of my private students here in Dharamsala before I opened the space. And when she came to me, she had about 5 years MMA experience. And she really took to Jeet Kune Do and Krav Maga and boxing. I was kind of giving her a bit of a mixed bag and a little bit of everything. And Navia was still to this day is one of the most impressive students I've ever had. She has a very small stature, and the way she puts her body into her strikes is unbelievable. She hits harder than most guys who weigh twice her weight.
Nice.
In the space. And I was so impressed with her body mechanics and how quickly she would learn. I would teach her something, and it could be something relatively complex, and she would just get it, super quick. Like, again, it was almost like a photographic memory. So when I opened the space, in fact, before I opened it, Navia was one of the first people I reached out to. And I told her I would love for her to be involved, particularly with the kids and the women's self-defense. And I love the fact that she was also Indian, which I thought was really cool, because, then you kind of have a male foreigner and a female Indian teaching. And we always, I think we had a really good chemistry together with the way when she was my student, but I also saw dynamics that I thought would transfer to us teaching really well together. So I called Navia before I opened the space and told her that if she planned to return to Dharamsala, she was doing some dancing work at the time here. She's a dance instructor.
Okay.
And I told her I would love to explore her doing the kids class and women's self-defense program with me. And it worked out where she was able to do that. So she did that for a good part of last year.
Okay.
And she'll actually be coming back to Dharamsala early this coming week. And
cool.
We'll rejoin the academy then. And the other assistant instructor, Asi, so that was by chance. Okay. So when I was opening the academy, Asi also at that time was doing some private Muay Thai lessons. And it kind of caught me off guard because, as I mentioned to you, Brian, no one was doing anything with martial arts in the space.
Yeah.
So a mutual friend had told me about Asi and said, there's this guy doing some Muay Thai. And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. I would like to meet him. So she put us in touch, and I went and met Asi, and we just bonded right away. And he now actually is one of my closest friends. And Asi has about 10 years Muay Thai experience. And I just thought, okay, this would be really cool to have him teach in my space. And I had quite a bit of a bigger space than he had. So I just invited him over to teach. And that organically came together really well. Yeah.
Very well. Congrats. That's awesome. I mean, it sounds like it's very successful and hopefully continues to grow. So I'm curious now with your background and the story you have, which is extremely interesting. I love your story. Any thoughts of writing a book?
I haven't had thoughts of writing a book specific to my journey with martial arts.
Okay.
But I have thought about maybe at one point putting together a book on some of the more psychological aspects of self-defense, perhaps.
Okay.
I think there's so many books out there about, different techniques and approaches to the physical side of self-defense. But I think some of the really cool gems I got from Guro Dan and from some of the high-level Krav Maga instructors have been more the psychological aspect. And that would probably be a very small book. That's a thought I've had in my mind at some point.
Cool. Well, you have to let me know if it happens. I will add a link at a later date to the book.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian.
So over your martial arts journey that started all the way back with your dad teaching you some Kempo stuff, is there one philosophy that stands out for you? One, whether either you've learned from someone else or developed yourself, just one philosophy that's at the top of your list?
Yes. And I would say probably stemming the most from Sifu Augustine Fang, which is that, the true spirit of martial arts is for it only to be used for self-defense. Mm-hmm. And to even take that a step further and say, even if a confrontation comes, that using your martial art should be an absolute last resort. And I remember one time him sharing a story about a scenario where he was walking Tucson, where he lives, can kind of be quite a rough area, actually. Mm-hmm. And it was when he had recently immigrated to the U.S. from Hong Kong. And, he was walking late in the evening alone, and a guy approached him who was a bit intoxicated and asked for his wallet. And, Sifu Fang assessed very quickly that, he could obviously handle the situation with his Wing Chun, quite easily. Yep. But he actually took out his wallet and he said, look, I have my license and some photos in here. That's important to me. But he took out the money he had, which I think was, if I remember right, it was like $60 or $70. And he handed it to the guy and said, would it be okay if I keep my wallet? Because there's some sentimental things. And the guy took the money and left. And he told this story a couple times in class. I remember him saying that was the best spent $60 he ever spent in his life because he saved that person immense physical pain. And
That's cool.
I just thought, wow, here's someone who's one of the highest level, Wing Chun masters probably alive. And, he made the decision to actually hand over money in his wallet to this individual because he didn't want to run the risk of inflicting physical pain on him. I don't know if my morals would be, I would hope they would be close to that level, but I just always took that as a bar for me, Brian, that, martial arts should always be the last resort in any sense. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Oh, definitely. And that's kind of cool because I know me, when I used to travel a lot more when I was younger, I used to actually carry 2 wallets. I had one that had an expired driver's license and like $10 cash, and 1 or 2 other random things maybe that I kept in one pocket, and then my regular one. And then just with that thought that if anyone ever came and said, hey, give me your wallet, I'd give them that one and hopefully just diffuse the situation. They take it and leave. And luckily never had to go through that experience, but
it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
yeah. It's a cool thought. Yeah.
Like I said, never had to do anything with it, but it's the thought was there in case I ever had to. So, all right. How about a worst martial arts related injury? Have you been lucky or have you had some bad ones?
Yeah, I had one bad one.
Okay.
So when I was training in Los Angeles, I had a minor car accident, very minor, and very, very minor back injury. Just my muscles were kind of tightening up a bit. And as I mentioned to you earlier in the interview, I was only in LA to train. I wasn't working. I had the only friends I made were friends at the academy. And the academy was really my life at that point. And that's why I was there. And when the injury came, I remember I saw a chiropractor and they said, you need to take a couple of weeks off. And I just thought, I can work through this, and so I kept going to class, kept grinding, and the injury kept getting worse and worse. And I just thought, somehow in my mind, no, this is going to go away on its own. And then it got to a really horrific point where, at its worst level, I couldn't sleep more than 3 or 4 hours because I would wake up in such excruciating pain. And it got to a point where I just said, I absolutely need to now just stop. And I ended up going to Portland, Oregon and taking like a month off and spending time with family up there. But it took me about 2.5 years for that injury to really heal.
Wow.
And so that would definitely be the worst injury I had without question.
Okay. And then what are your thoughts on MMA? Is that something, are you a fan of the UFC? Do you watch it?
I don't, and it's, occasionally if someone tells me about a fight, I'll check it out, but I'm honestly not a big fan, and for a couple reasons, I guess. One, I've always been drawn more, I think, to martial arts as an art and a form of self-defense. And, to me, when MMA started, you and I are old enough where we remember when the whole thing kickstarted with the Gracies and stuff. And I just remember looking at it and thinking, man, because I was pretty heavy in the Wing Chun and stuff at that point. And I just thought, well, a Wing Chun practitioner or even a JKD guy could really never compete in this because it's all vital targets. It's all about eyes, throat, groin, which are obviously illegal in MMA.
Yeah.
So for that reason, I think in the beginning, I had a bit of a bias. Now that I'm older and I have more of an open mind, I could obviously see the tremendous value in BJJ and Muay Thai, both as a sport and even carrying over the self-defense. Yeah, for one reason or another, Brian, in my martial art journey, I just never got into the ground stuff. I always preferred the standing up striking arts.
Yep.
And I think because of the way UFC started and it was so dominated by BJJ and the wrestlers and grapplers, like right in the beginning, it just wasn't my cup of tea, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, I never really got into it, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I have a few fun questions we use to wrap up the interview. So obviously you just said you weren't really into MMA, but you did some boxing and stuff when you were younger. So let's say you were going to do like MMA or a big boxing match or something. What is your walk-in music going to be? What song's playing as you're taking that walk into the ring or into the cage?
Oh, wow. That's a cool one. I think it would have to be Eminem, one of his songs I would have to come out to. I forget the names of some of the tracks.
Yeah.
But I think these days that's the music, when I'm working that when I'm working out myself that really gets me going when the tracks kick on. So
I like it.
That's the angle I would probably go.
All right, cool. All right, how 3, 4, 5 names you'd put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts?
Okay, definitely my personal Mount Rushmore of the teachers
correct.
I've studied with.
I mean, it's your personal choice, so it can be teachers you study with. It can be just someone like a Bruce Lee that you maybe idolize as a child. It's completely up to you.
Cool. So I would say Bruce Lee, for sure. Imi, the founder of Krav Maga.
Nice.
Guro Dan, without a doubt.
Nice.
Ip Man. Sifu Augustine Fong. I think those are the ones that stand out probably the most to me. Yeah.
That's a good Mount Rushmore. Okay. I like it. All right. How about a favorite martial arts book?
Yeah. So I would have to say Karate Do, My Way of Life by Funakoshi would be the one that stands out to me the most. And probably for the same reasons that I shared with you when you asked about what element of martial arts do I hold most dear to my heart. And I mentioned, the nonviolent self-defense approach.
Yep.
I remember, and I mean, I read that book, it would be at least 20 years ago, but I do remember that element really resonating where he really talked about, going even a step beyond martial arts for self-defense, but really only using it if you had no choice whatsoever at all. And he really talked about the humility in martial arts and just a lot about the spirit of it. And so for that reason, that book really resonated with me.
I need to reread that. I haven't read that since I was a teenager. I need to dig out my copy and read that again. So, all right. How about a favorite martial arts video game? Do you ever get into gaming?
Favorite martial arts video game. So can I pick a boxing video game? Is
Definitely.
that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So for sure, Fight Night then.
Okay.
I don't think they've made a new one in a lot of years, but I remember when I was in the video games and I had, I think the last one I had maybe was the PlayStation.
Okay.
I remember Fight Night being, just such a super cool game. It was the first boxing game that had all the real boxers. You had Roy Jones and you had all the modern day guys. And then you also had like the legends, you had Tyson and Dempsey and Ali and Frazier and Ken Norton.
Wow.
And, and it actually resembled the different fighters pretty well. That would be my favorite for sure. In fact, if they made a new Fight Night, I would probably be tempted to get a video game console once again.
Nice. I honestly don't think I don't think I've ever heard of that one. I know I've never played it.
Oh yeah. It's a super cool game.
I'll have to look
or at least it was back in the day.
Oh yeah. I mean, I have people that pick Mike Tyson's Punch Out, so from back in the day.
That was a great one too, actually. Yeah, that was a classic.
With the big heads in the hand. Yeah, it was a fun one. But yeah, I got to look up Fight Night. I'm kind of curious now. So, all right. How about a favorite martial arts TV show?
Favorite martial arts TV show? Probably the original Kung Fu with David Carradine.
Yeah, that one gets mixed. Some people just love it when they were a kid, and other people just martial arts was so bad. And David Carradine, it's like, so yeah, it's kind of fun to hear the guests talk about that because it's either love it or hate it. I think not much in between.
So I love particularly the pilot, which was basically like a movie, right? Yeah. I've gone back and I've watched that one quite a few times, and I really dug that.
Did you ever try watching the remake that was out a couple of years ago during COVID with the female lead?
No, I didn't even know there was a remake.
I can't remember. It was only 1 or 2 seasons. I watched a few episodes. It wasn't bad. It didn't hook me like the original. But I also know I've heard rumors, and I haven't heard anything about it in almost 6 months, but I've heard rumors that they're making an updated movie version of it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, supposedly starring Donnie Yen. I don't know if it's true, but I've heard rumors about it, and I hope it's true.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
cool.
We will see. All right. How about a favorite martial arts movie?
So I would have to go with the original, the first and third, probably Karate Kid. And I know I was reading on your profile that also was like the original Karate Kid kind of sparked your interest.
Yep.
So yeah, I would probably have to go with that. And then if I extend it to boxing, of course, the Rockies.
Nice.
You can't go wrong with the Rocky movies.
So as a Rocky fan, I got to ask, are you a fan of Rocky 5? Because I know that's usually another one of those hit or miss. It's like Rocky fans either love it or hate it. I'm a fan of it personally. I liked the street fight with Tommy Gunn and stuff. What are your thoughts on that one?
I actually am as well. And I was surprised to read that, Stallone himself had some regrets about that one.
Yeah.
But Rocky 5 was honestly one of my favorites.
Mine
in the
too.
Series. I love it.
I think 4 and 5 are my 2 favorites in the series. So I like it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would probably say 1, 4, and 5.
Okay.
Those 3 stand out to me as my favorites. And I love the Creeds also.
Oh, yeah. So good. So good. Yeah. And you mentioned Karate Kid 3. That's another one that's kind of the polarizing thing where a lot of the Karate Kid fans don't like the third one. And I'm actually a fan of it. I think we have a lot of the same taste when it comes to movies.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah. I love the third one. I thought the third one was great.
Well, because my goal was to try to get someone from, the Karate Kid world on my show. And now I've had like 6 or 7. But one of the first guests that said yes was Sean Kanan, Mike Barnes from Karate Kid 3.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he was fun to have that. I had him and Fumio Demura were 2 of my early guests on the show. I was very
that's awesome.
Yeah, very lucky to have them as being a huge Karate Kid fan. And now, what were you a fan of the newest Karate Kid one with Jackie Chan and Ralph Macchio together?
It's called Legends,
yes,
right?
Correct.
I still haven't seen that one, Brian, but okay. I was a fan of Cobra Kai. I've watched all the Cobra Kai seasons.
Yeah.
How was the new one? What was your thoughts on it?
It's worth watching at least once. I liked it. My biggest complaint about it was too short.
Oh, yeah? Okay, interesting.
It was like 88 minutes or something. I mean, it was like less than an hour and a half. Ralph was definitely not in it enough. I mean, the one thing with some of the biggest parts of Karate Kid in all the movies are like the training montage. They didn't really do the training montage was like less than 2 minutes. I mean,
oh, wow.
Yeah, okay. they needed I think it could have been a lot better. If it would have been a 2-hour movie, it would have probably been really good. I mean, the new kid, great actor. I love other stuff he's been into and everything. And the fight scenes were decent, but I wish it was longer. The end credit scene is phenomenal. Not I won't give it away for you, but the end credit scene is great. But it definitely should have been longer. It was not enough. I mean, I wasn't a fan of the original Jackie Chan one.
Yeah, I wasn't either. I think that's why I wasn't. And I read the reviews, and they got kind of lousy reviews.
Yeah, because I'm a huge Jackie Chan fan. And the worst part is that when that came out, it was a remake of Karate Kid. But then when Legends came out, they're like, no, it wasn't actually a remake. It's in the same universe. And this guy, Jackie Chan's character was friends with Mr. Miyagi. I'm like, no, they completely changed everything. So that was probably another part going into Legends why I was like, yeah. So yeah, like I said, it's definitely worth watching at least once, but it's probably not one I'll watch over and over like the first 3 Karate Kids.
Sure. Yeah, that's one of the things I loved about the Rocky series is they never really, they actually maintained consistency very well with the story throughout all of them.
Yeah.
Even right into the Creeds.
Yep.
And when I saw that as well, that's like, okay, you got Jackie Chan and Ralph Macchio coming together and they're trying to merge the 2 universes. It just didn't appeal to me.
I'm hoping if they do another movie, it'll tap more into the Cobra Kai side of things. Because Cobra Kai was so good and so successful, and fingers crossed we get some more of those characters. But hopefully. Right, final question. Now this one doesn't have to be a martial arts movie. Any movie in your whole life, just a favorite movie fight scene. Is there just one fight scene that stands out for you?
Favorite movie fight scene. Let me think for a second. I would probably have to go with Rocky and Apollo Creed.
Oh, nice. Which one? First one or second one?
I think the second one.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a bit cheesy, like looking back on it now, but the way that the second fight ended, where they get knocked down and they're both down, and neither one can barely move, and Rocky somehow climbs up. Probably have to go with that. Yeah, and I would add to that also, I love the mystique of their third fight, the one we didn't get to see, that we saw just at the very end, I think, of Rocky 3.
Yep. So just the punches. Yep. That was
good.
Yep. I know. I was hoping maybe they actually filmed it and it would have shown up at the end of one of the other movies, but that never happened. So
no. But the dynamic between Rocky and Apollo was awesome.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. It was so cool that they came together and everything. So yeah, I was very happy about that. All right. Before I let you go, Richard, is there anything I forgot to ask you or just last minute stuff you want to mention? And I will put links for your school and anything else you need me to when the episode comes out.
Oh, thanks, Brian. Yeah. I mean, nothing else that I could think of. I mean, I think it was a pretty comprehensive dialogue, interview, covered a lot of ground.
Yep.
So yeah, as I said, I'm just super grateful to be on the show. I've been a fan for quite some time.
Appreciate that.
Thanks again, man, for having me on.
Hey, thank you. I do. I seriously, I love your story. It's great. I love, some of the people you got to train with and the experiences you've had. And I think the listeners are really going to enjoy this one.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. And yeah, if you wouldn't mind just plugging the website, that would be super cool.
Definitely. Oh yeah. I'll definitely put a link for that on there, and because it's the hama-training.com. I'll put a link out there, and we'll get people over there checking it out for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate it, man.
Wrap up today's episode by taking your own training to the next level with Martial Theory by Steve Perlman, the book that's redefining martial arts thinking. Find Martial Theory on Amazon today. Join the worldwide movement at martialtheoryu.com, where you'll find Q&A sessions, live events, and direct guidance from Steve himself. Use code EverydayMA for 20% off for life. That's martialtheoryu.com, code EverydayMA. Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.